What's up, bitches and boys? My name is KotyTang. It's been a while since Breath of the Wild came out, and Breath of the Wild 2 is just over the horizon. I think it's time to discuss a few things that I'm hoping they picked up on over the years. Before we begin, let me just say, I'm not going to be bringing up that the time travel events of Age of Calamity are what Breath of the Wild needs. The story is fine as it is, so you won't be hearing me say that Link and company should have been interdimensional travelers and prevented the calamity from happening. I'm also not saying that Breath of the Wild's participation award level of storytelling was good. I'm just saying, Age of Calamity's story is not about to win any prizes from me anytime soon, and Breath of the Wild is... it's good enough. But what Age of Calamity does introduce is a lot of new ideas into the series. Aside from its over-the-top gameplay and 1000 enemy fights, it also adds a variety of systems and enemy types that Breath of the Wild 2 can absolutely add in. The easiest thing to add in is enemy types and their attacks. There's already a bunch of enemy types in Breath of the Wild as it is, but none of them are more than another color at best. Sure, they might have a bigger weapon and hit harder, but if we follow that logic, then there's also 15 different Links on this adventure, because he can change his clothes and weapon too. I've always found that to be so stupid in games, to have an enemy and then just make them another color and say they're different. Like, at least change their model up a little bit. As hilarious as it is for Ganon to have a completely brain-dead, incompetent army, it really doesn't make any sense on how he's somehow able to take over Hyrule time and time again. It wasn't until Age of Calamity that I really thought about how these guys could actually be a terrible force if they actually acted like an evil army. From the very start of Age of Calamity, you have a hierarchy of bokoblins commanding each other. They even grow up to the point where they have coordinated charge attacks with their spears. There are firing squads of Lizalfos and moblins straight up carrying giant crates of explosives on their back. Each of these enemies also come with special skills that they can use against you, whether they're bokoblins or a guardian. They all have a variety of special attacks rather than just running around and trying to swing or jab you once every 5 minutes with a stick. The fact that these enemies have so many different ways of attacking really helps sell the fact that they're, a frighteningly powerful force, because honestly, if they weren't, they would just be a common thing you see in Hyrule, and people would have already come up with several ways to deal with them. And if they're so evil, I'm more than certain that these guys would be constantly killed on sight due to what their mere existence entails. But as we can see, these guys all work together, and I would assume they have a society somewhere, otherwise I couldn't imagine where they all came from. Okay, this is slowly becoming a Zelda world building makes no sense video, so let's shift away from that. The enemies of Breath of the Wild do have a bit of a dynamic attack system where what they do is slightly unpredictable, but it's not nearly as varied as Age of Calamity's scripted attacks are. Their attacks lead all the way up to them becoming elemental versions of themselves, all equipped with deadlier attacks based upon the type they are. Even better, there are malice versions of enemies as well, which, when you think about it, of course there would be. I find it very hard to believe that Ganon has overrun Hyrule when there's peace everywhere, and as anybody could tell you, Breath of the Wild is a very peaceful game filled with more beauty than there is harrowing battle-torn areas. Age of Calamity simply fixes that issue. No matter what enemy you're facing, they all have several attacks that they can use to get the upper hand against you. Especially when it comes to the world bosses like Hinox and Lynels. They're more threatening in Age of Calamity than they've ever been in Breath of the Wild. When it comes to equipment, okay, yeah, Breath of the Wild got it right. Except for weapons breaking, that is. Here's a thought. Upgrading and fixing your weapons! Oh, you think breaking weapons is cool? It makes sense because you use them, does it? Oh, alright, okay, I'll do you one better. I think armor breaking is cool. You wanna know what gets used more than a sword and a shield? How about the cloth and metal that literally takes the murderous blows of every sword, hammer, and magic blast? You think breaking things you need to survive is cool? I think being able to fix and upgrade things you need to survive is even cooler. You know how I played Breath of the Wild every time? That's right. When my sword broke, I'd grab another sword. I don't look for a spear or a hammer. I grab another single-handed sword and get back to business. And you know what I do when I run out of swords? I run to my stash and get me another pair of swords so I can keep using my sword. Skyward Sword introduced one of my favorite Zelda systems to this day, and that's the visual upgrades of your weapons and various gadgets which require materials that you can find all over Hyrule. The best part is that it's all visual, but it also gives a reason to all of those things you're constantly picking up. Something like that has such a ridiculously small presence in Breath of the Wild that it's allowed Skyward Sword of all games to have an edge over it. Age of Calamity introduces an NPC type that I think Breath of the Wild can seriously benefit from, and that's the blacksmith. You know what's cool about Age of Calamity? You can have one of each type of weapon to use at will, and not only that, you can upgrade it, give it better skills, and even replace it with something better, and then upgrade that one instead. What a concept that is! Breath of the Wild did get some things right, and that's when it comes to wearable equipment. Upgrades do come to your armor, and every piece of armor comes with its own properties, but I just can't seem to help not enjoying your weapons breaking over time. When it's first done, it's cool and hectic to be out of weapons and have to resort to any means necessary to survive. But the novelty wears off the farther in you go for the game, and eventually it just becomes a nuisance. Here's a suggestion. You can still have the feature of weapons breaking and keep the hectic gameplay intact, but I think a new layer should be added to that. Your weapons can still break, but you can also repair them. Meaning, if you don't want to lose a certain weapon, you have a choice of not even using it when it's breaking, or say screw it and destroy the weapon. Maybe even take it a step further and have broken blades in your inventory that you can repair back to normal and continue using the weapon, or throw it because you don't care. I don't think the broken weapon mechanic is that good, and I never have. And that is simply because you can't do anything about the durability of your weapon. Speaking of weapon usage, Link's basic attacks that he constantly uses in Breath of the Wild get old. There is no variety to what you can do in them. Now, I'm not asking Breath of the Wild to become a combo-heavy hack-and-slash game, but I am making the case that Link should be able to learn a plethora of attacks and abilities for each weapon type. There is absolutely no way he hasn't picked up a single new trick since beginning his adventure. Twilight Princess had Link learning several different ways to overcome and overpower his enemies. And then there's the problem with the amounts of gadgets and tools Link has throughout his adventures, which have been incredibly reduced. But honestly, many of the items didn't have to be removed at all. This includes items like the hookshot, iron boots, bug nets, fishing rods, lanterns, and many more things from various series of Zelda. They've removed much of the equipment for the one-size-fits-all dungeon type, and you proceed to play the entire game with the same toolset for hundreds of hours. While sure, it's cool that you can do anything in the game at any time, I feel they've sacrificed a large section of creativity by not limiting the player when it comes to certain sections of the game. It was cool for the first game, but I personally feel like getting back to the more focused content for Breath of the Wild will work so much better, and I know how to do it. In order to keep the spirit of Breath of the Wild 1, the best way to do this, and to have done this, would have been to have the various regions of the game such as Death Mountain, Gerudo Desert and such to unlock certain items, tools, and skills that will be majorly used in that region so that you can still have heavily focused dungeons and experiences. This is honestly how the majority of Zelda games already did it, and after leaving that region, you could then apply the new things you've acquired into the open world, with hookshots now allowing you to climb faster or getting to areas you couldn't get to before, being able to use the iron boots to dive underwater to find hidden chests, discovering caves that lead to even larger secrets or enemy bases, and many more secrets the various Zelda games had when just traveling the world. When it comes to the ancient shrines, I feel like every single one of them would have benefited from this system as well, allowing the player to still enter and try the shrine, but definitely making it much harder if they lack the required item to complete it. I love the idea of freedom in Breath of the Wild, but with consecutive playthroughs you can really tell that it was missing the creativity of previous Zelda games and their more focused content. Not everything needs to be filled with this idea of endless freedom. Freedom for the majority is good, but freedom to the point of degraded quality is troublesome. The majority of Breath of the Wild can be played with freedom, but I know for a fact it can be enhanced through these returning and new systems, especially when Breath of the Wild 2 releases, where Hyrule has already been explored by everyone there and back at that point. The overwhelming importance of Zelda, something that both Hyrule Warriors games did very well, was really make you realize that Zelda is a force to be reckoned with. In the majority of games that Zelda is in, she proves to be a useless damsel in distress, while simultaneously possessing a power that can literally hold back one of, if not the strongest version of Ganon ever, while also maintaining her age for over 100 years. How completely ass backwards does that logic sound? Honestly, this is the problem with any magical female in anything ever. but I think recurring series of Nintendo games have run this trope so deep into the ground, it's a joke now. Let's give female characters a chance to be characters. Zelda can literally halt entire armies and keep a man more powerful than the entire cast in prison, but she can't seem to defend herself in any situation ever. Age of Calamity presented a much more useful Zelda, one that we would never see otherwise in Breath of the Wild. A Zelda who mixes the power of light and a bow, and is shown to be perfectly capable of immobilizing the ancient technology to even taking on the Ganon Blights entirely by herself. Whenever a Zelda game gives you a glimpse of what the Triforce of Wisdom can actually do, it completely baffles my mind how Zelda is always written as such a throwaway character, when in every entry she could literally be right by Link's side and doing an even better job at saving the world than he can do. Speaking about important things, the amount of cutscenes that Age of Calamity introduced enhanced the story even further. Yeah, sure, I'm as happy as the next guy with characters standing around and blankly staring at each other as 30 minutes of text has to be read to get to the next part of the game. But Age of Calamity kinda had me thinking, why are cutscenes mostly restricted to the past? There's plenty of moments that could have used a cutscene just to enhance the scenario. It was during the bosses of Breath of the Wild where the cutscenes would really be utilized, and that made me want to see them so much more. Watching events unfold adds a greater level of connection to the characters than just watching them awkwardly make grunting noises as they shift between standing animations while talking to them. Again, a feature that every other Zelda game had that was shafted in this game. And this time they can't even use the excuse of not wanting it to affect the freedom of the player. Let's not forget central hubs, an area where Link and company can always meet up and make their plan. One that constantly changes and delivers a constant flow of quests and things to do as you progress through the game. Skyloft was that place for Skyward Sword, and I think an in-construction castle town would literally be the icing on the cake. Repeatedly returning to a city that's being rebuilt and constantly helping the citizens fight off enemies, delivering goods to create stores, training grounds, and many more things would enhance Breath of the Wild 2 so much more. Having towns that are always full of fun things to do is one of the things that Zelda has always been good at. I don't mean to keep bringing up Skyward Sword, but Skyloft is one of my favorite Zelda hubs still to this day. The limitless possibilities of a hub can really enhance a game if done correctly. It's just a small list of things that I think could be added to the Breath of the Wild games, or any game that tries to pay attention to this type of gameplay. There's hundreds of wish lists and things that I could have said to add to the game, but I've decided to include a decent list of only achievable things that Breath of the Wild 2 could realistically add into their game that would serve to enhance the replayability and gameplay itself. Breath of the Wild is already an amazing game, and it served the test of time to a degree that is rarely seen in gaming. So with Breath of the Wild 2, I have extremely high expectations for it. No, I won't be overly disappointed if some of these systems aren't implemented, but I do think the game will suffer if they refuse to start taking inspiration from previous Zelda games, as well as Age of Calamity. Yeah, you can strike gold once, but I'll be waiting to see if they can do it again. And that's all the time I have for this video, guys. If you have any systems you think Breath of the Wild 2 should add, go ahead and throw a comment down below. Be sure to like the video and subscribe on your way out, and follow me on Twitter at KotyTang so you can harass me. I hope you all have a pleasant day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.